as you all know, this is such a critical time to be having these conversations about some of the issues that are facing the younger generation and will continue to face generations after us. But in order to continue to have those discussions, it's so critical that we have our decision makers in the room. And I'm really excited that we have the Prime Minister Scott Morrison here this morning. The session will start with an introduction from the Prime Minister himself, and then we'll go into a bit of an in-conversation question and answer. So without further ado, I will hand over to the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
Well, thank you very much, Sophie, and thanks for everyone who's joining us here on this call today. I'm so glad we've had the opportunity to do this, and I particularly look forward to getting to the questions as soon as we can. But before I go any further, I just acknowledge the Ngunnawal people. At least that's where I am today in Canberra, and acknowledge their elders past and present, and of course the future elders of young Indigenous Australians who are coming through the ranks, who just give me so much hope in the way they are sort of seeking to take forward the many important issues in Indigenous communities right across the country. Can I also acknowledge the many young people who are serving in our Defence Forces and many young people who are already veterans of that service. They've made an incredible sacrifice for our country. Last Saturday week, I was down at the War Memorial, and I was there to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And it was quite a sobering time for those of us who did not live through that period, and I'm assuming that's everyone who's on this call, I suspect. To think back what it was like in those times is hard to get your head around. I used to talk to my grandparents about it. My grandfather fought the Second World War. And I met three fellows there who had served in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, all now in their late 90s. They joined up when they were 16, 17 and 18, and they'd gone off to fight in that terrible conflict. And I think of the life that they've led since then and their experience. And when I've talked to particularly veterans and those in all conflicts we've been in, one of the things I've learnt, and I hope one of the things that you're learning as you go through a generational challenge like you're facing now, is that you're stronger than you think. These experiences test us all, and we find out how strong we are as individuals. We find out how strong our relationships are. We find out how much we depend on each other in these times. And I think this is a time for us to reflect on that and how we can support each other and help each other through what is a very difficult time. Young people are feeling the blow of this economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the COVID-19 recession that it has caused more than arguably any other part of our community. Now, when I came out of university, it seems like a very long time ago now, and it was because it was almost 30 years ago that Australia experienced its last recession. And I left university like many of you are now, or going through university or worrying about what does it mean next year when you get out of school. And that was the case for many of my friends too, back at that time. There was a lot of uncertainty. There were 1 million people out of work. They were hard economic times. Unemployment was high. But then, as now, there was also hope. There was still opportunity, and those opportunities were realised. And that will be the case also for young Australians today. Because I want to assure you, as difficult as it is at the moment, there is another side to this. There is another side where Australia emerges once again, where we actually do go back to the life that we loved and we're working so hard to achieve again. Now, hopefully that occurs with a vaccine, but if a vaccine doesn't come soon, we will find a way to ensure that we can get things as back to normal as we possibly can, and we've all got a role to play in achieving that. It begins with ensuring that we beat this virus as best as we possibly can and we suppress it so we can just continue to go to school, to go to university, to get trained, to get into jobs, to spend time with our friends, to enjoy family and enjoy the wonderful country and move around it as we like. And that means we need to continue to be diligent when it comes to our social distancing, when it comes to dealing with if you're crook, don't go to work, make sure you get tested, testing, tracing, containing the outbreaks, making sure that we manage all of those important social distancing. Because while young people specifically are often not the ones most impacted in a health sense by COVID-19, we do know that young people also can be one of the most significant spreaders of the virus in terms of social interactions. And that puts the most vulnerable in our community at risk. And I'm not just talking about older Australians. I'm talking about those who are undergoing chemotherapy treatments and have immune deficiencies and are coping with those. That can be young children. It's remote Indigenous communities. It's those with disabilities. It's right across our community, and all of us, I know, have a responsibility to do the best we possibly can, and there you are, to ensure that we can protect all of Australians in our community. And that means we can open up our economy again, and I'm so keen to see us do that. You know, we're turning this corner in Victoria. I know it's really hard for people in Victoria, but you're turning the corner. The sacrifices that you're making, the terrible events of having a curfew in Melbourne, something I thought unimaginable in this country. We've never had one before. Even in the war, we didn't have one. And here we are, a curfew in one of our most large and most significant cities in the country. These are historic times. They are confronting times. They are anxious times. They can be scary times. But at the same time, what I do know is that Australia is doing better than almost every other developed country in the world today, both from a health perspective as well as from an economic perspective. And if we keep on the path of working together and keeping the virus suppressed, even when we have outbreaks like in Victoria, getting back on top of it, then we will continue to chart our way out of this. I know that young people have lost jobs, but I know 150,000 young people have found jobs again in the last few months, and there will be more. The way our economy has been impacted by the shutdowns means that it's actually young people, while being the first to be impacted, will also be the first to find jobs again. But we know we have to do more than that to ensure that young people get opportunities again. And that's why I put $2 billion into a job trainer fund. That's supporting 180,000 apprentices, and it's creating 340,000 additional training places for people who will be looking for those opportunities as they come out of school or they lose employment. We're putting a lot of effort into skills training in this country, and we'll be ensuring that those university places are maintained and kept up to ensure those who will be looking for university options when they leave school, that we can make sure that those places are there as well for you to rely on, and so you can study and prepare yourself for your future. The other point I wanted to make is I know the mental stress and the anxiety that comes with the COVID-19 pandemic and recession. I know that's particularly tough. And I was with Pat McGorry. Many of you might know him, who was the instigator of Headspace many years ago with the Howard government. And Pat was raising with me the concerns particularly faced by young people in Victoria. So we put more resources into Headspace, into Lifeline, into Kids Helpline, all of these important mental health supports. And the Victorian government has done the same thing. In New South Wales, they've put an extra $80 million into mental health supports. There is a complete open door in getting further mental health resources, particularly for young people, into the community. When I was speaking to some young people that Pat introduced me to, though, they were university students, school people still in year 12, they also told me that they weren't just worried about themselves. They were worried about their families. They were worried about their grandparents. They were worried about their parents going through difficult economic times. And my message to you is simply this: the resources and the help is there, and I'd encourage you to reach out to it. And we will keep putting more resources into these mental health supports as much as is necessary to ensure that that is there to help people. And so reach out to each other, look out for each other, reach out to the support services that are available. They are there for you, and they are intentionally designed to help you get through these times of anxiety. I know what it was like 30 years ago, and this is much worse. And I know the anxieties that you will feel. And I know the care and love that you have for your families and your friends, and how that also impacts on you. But, you know, Australia's an amazing place, just like those 3 old diggers that I met last Saturday week down at the War Memorial. They got through it. Australians have come through everything. And you know what? Every time we've come out of it stronger. And this is your generation's challenge. This is my generation's challenge, who are in leadership now. It is our challenge together to demonstrate that we are up to the inspiration that our grandparents, my grandparents' generation, went through during that Second World War and the Depression. We are up to this. You're up to this. I'm counting on you. You're counting on me. And so let's make a deal. Let's live up to that promise to each other and help each other, and we will get through this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We might jump into some questions now, and this is why we run summits like people, to hear from some of the most influential decision makers in the country, to be able to start putting those forward plans in. And you acknowledge that young people have been some of the hardest hit by this crisis, but young people were struggling in insecure work even before the crisis. We were experiencing low wage growth, struggling to get into work that was relevant to what we studied. And this has all been really exacerbated by the crisis. We saw that of the total job losses between March and May, 44% of them were young people aged 15 to 25. For the past 18 months, the National Youth Commission has been going around the country preparing this discussion paper on a youth futures guarantee, a national strategy for young people. And my question to you today is, will your government commit to working towards a national strategy that deals and encompasses with this broader set of issues that young people are facing today?
Well, of course we'll engage with that. I mean, one of my most important priorities is to get young people into jobs, because I know I've worked in many different portfolios. I've worked as an immigration minister, a social services minister, a treasurer, and I know that if I can't get a young person into the job by their early 20s, mid-20s, then I know they will face even greater challenges over the course of their life. And become dependent on welfare, which is not what I want for any Australian. Not because it costs money, of course it does, but the greater loss, the greater cost to the country is an Australian that hasn't been able to realise their potential. And that's why I'm so committed to getting young people into work. That's why I'm so committed to working with the premiers. And we've recently, that job trainer agreement that we had that put an extra $1 billion into training support and an agreement to reform how skills training is delivered in this country, so young people can get trained for jobs that are actually there with skills that businesses actually need. That's how young people get into jobs. But to get young people into jobs, we've got to have businesses that are successful and that are growing. And we've got to get things out of the way so businesses can actually take people on and put them in more secure work. Governments can't create more secure work. Economies, businesses that employ people, they create secure work. And it's important that we get the changes in place so businesses can employ more young people. One of the programs I was involved in when I was Treasurer was the Youth Path program to ensure that particularly longer-term disadvantaged young people could get the skills they need to even get to an interview, let alone be successful in that interview, to be able to get themselves in a position where they were getting many of the skills needed to be able to get a job. That for whatever reason, through no fault of their own, I'm quite certain in the vast majority of cases. I mean, I was fortunate. I have wonderful parents. I lost my father earlier this year, but I had wonderful parents that taught me many things. So many young people, sadly, these days don't have that. And we need to ensure that they get the supports now that make up for that, where they've been let down in those circumstances, and so they can succeed in life. So it's a huge priority for me. And COVID, no COVID, it remains a huge priority.
Sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, I just want to get to the crux of the question there, because it is really about a national strategy. We can talk as much as we want about, foreseeing a future where young people are able to get into the jobs, but you are the Prime Minister and you do have the capacity to put forward a plan to address these issues. And I just want to go back to that question, which is, will you look to a national youth strategy, because we haven't seen something like that since 2010, and we're seeing now what the effects of the system is that's not working for young people. So will your government look to a national strategy for young people?
Well, we'll continue to follow a national strategy, and where that strategy needs to be continually updated and improved, that's exactly what we'll do. That's why getting young people in jobs, that is our strategy. That is our plan. And for that, they need the training, they need the skills, and they need the jobs that they can go into that realises their economic opportunities and gives them that start in life. So whether it's the investment in education, record investments in education over the next decade. Schools funding is locked in for a decade. That's what we've been able to achieve. The skills training reforms that we're taking through the premiers, I mean, that's what matters, getting stuff actually changed and getting stuff done. So the Youth Minister will continue to work on these issues with those of the sector, and we'll listen carefully. A youth strategy has to bring into place the economic side of things, the social dimension of things. I mean, youth suicide prevention, we've made it a national priority for this country, and we've still got much more work to do. So there's no shortage of attention on the issues that are impacting young people, and my government will continue to address those in every single budget as we have.
You mentioned access to university, but the Education Minister, Dan Tehan, recently announced some pretty concerning policies that will increase the barriers to university access. Is this not in conflict with a commitment to making them more accessible?
Well, I don't agree with what you've put forward. What we're actually doing is creating more places and more opportunities, particularly in regional areas. You know, I grew up in Sydney. And I grew up not far from the University of New South Wales. I could run home from university, it was so close. But if you're living in a regional centre, if you're not in one of those cities where those facilities are more accessible, it's much tougher. And what Dan Tehan is doing, I mean, he comes from regional Victoria. He understands what's going on with young people in regional areas. And he knows that we need to get more places and more support to people living in those communities. So, look, I'd only suggest to you that that's not what Dan is doing, as you've outlined. Dan's actually doing the opposite. He's trying to get more opportunities, and particularly for young people in regional areas who so often have to leave their homes, leave their communities, leave the life that they want to have in regional areas and have to go to other places. We want to give them those opportunities where they are.
I appreciate that you mentioned mental health in your introduction, and this is such a critical issue, particularly for young people today. We know we're seeing increasing rates of mental illness and suicide, particularly amongst young people, and this has really been exacerbated by the health crisis. But we know that it's really critical not to be talking about mental health in silos, that so many other factors come into play in this space, which is why we sort of talk about this whole holistic approach around jobs and education and training. And one of the other factors there is the social safety net. And we know that this was increased, the job seeker payment increased at the beginning of the crisis, and that was really, really critical. And I know so many people appreciated that increase. Will the government commit to maintaining that higher level of social security beyond the March 2021, given that so many reports say that it's not plausible to live on such a low rate?
Well, you're right to note that we did double the payment through the COVID supplement, not just for job seeker, but for youth allowance other as well, which many people would be accessing as well. And not just for new people who are coming on it, but those who were already on it. And we've currently got arrangements in place for those supplements to be extended out to the end of December. And I said at the time that it's my expectation that given where things are at, that things would be extended out beyond that. Right now, whether it's job seeker or job keeper, we're just very focused on dealing with the economic supports we have to do through the pandemic. And we're waiting until we get to a better position in the pandemic before we make longer term commitments on this. Now, we're aware and we've done a lot of work on the adequacy of these payments and how they go forward, but we also have done a lot of work on how they impact on how the jobs market works and how sometimes these things can work against actually getting people into jobs. So right now, you can expect that those supports to continue to be in place throughout the pandemic. We'll look precisely at what we do post-December in the not too distant future. And then beyond that, we'll make further decisions. But for now, it's about getting through the pandemic and what can be done in the pandemic, because we're literally trying to help people in these situations get from day to day.
There are a lot of anxieties, though, for people, particularly young people, we know are really hard hit by economic downturns. And the reason for that is we are usually at the start of our working lives. There's little to no savings in the bank. And for today's young people, we are really in casualised and insecure work. And so regardless of whether we're not in stage 1 or 2 or 3 of the pandemic, we're always going to need to pay rent and put food on the table. And these expiry dates of the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payments really do place a lot of uncertainty on young people. And so what we're really asking is, can young people have faith that should the pandemic continue beyond March, should we remain in a position where jobs are few and far between, or underemployment continues to affect young people, will we be able to rely on the government so that we can continue to live and put food on the table?
Well, just look what we've done. I mean, JobKeeper and JobSeeker. JobKeeper is a program now with what we're putting in the Parliament this week of more than $100 billion. This is the single largest income support measure any government in this country has ever introduced. And I hope there won't be a need for one of that size again, but you can obviously never rule that out. And so the government moved quickly. And we did also, in fact, we moved on JobSeeker even more quickly. And so where the economic circumstances demanded, we have already demonstrated quickly and decisively and comprehensively to put those supports in place. So my commitment is what we've done. And I think young people can look at what we did and how quickly we did it to know that if people are needing help, they're going to get it.
I just have 2 final questions before we'll run out of time here. The next question is about climate change. And as you know, this is a huge issue, not just for young people, but people, of all walks of life. And my question is, what role will jobs in the renewable energy space play in regards to employment policies?
Well, they already are. I mean, Australia has one of the highest rates, if not one of the highest rates of renewable energy and investment anywhere in the world today. We have had record years of investments going into renewable energy technologies, and that's been supported by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the renewable energy targets, all of these measures that have been successfully put in place and has been getting those outcomes. Now, one of the great outcomes has been that renewable energy now is standing strongly on its own 2 feet, is attracting investment because it actually delivers a return. And we would expect to continue to see strong investment into those areas, not just because of Australia's natural advantages in this area, but it makes good sense for the investors, not just here in Australia, the big institutional funds, but overseas investors as well are seeing those opportunities. So I expect to continue to see a strong investment in renewable energy technologies going into the future. What I'd also add to that, though, is to make renewable energies, particularly as part of the energy grid, more effective, you need greater firming power. That means that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, the demands of reliable energy, which intermittent renewables can't provide, I mean, that's just a fact, you need the support of things like pumped hydro, and we have the biggest investment in the southern hemisphere of pumped hydro in the Snowy Hydro scheme, not far from where I am right now, billions of dollars going into that investment. And on top of that, what we're seeking to do with gas investments is ensure that those intermittent sources of renewables, the wind and other power, solar power and so on, is firmed by those gas-fired arrangements, which makes the renewable technologies usable and viable for the longer term. So you've got to have the two working together. So gas will provide a transition, I feel, support to our grid as the technology improves. But beyond that, we're investing significant amounts of public money in things like hydrogen and that technology and other forms of technology, which will over time ensure that we have a full transition occurring in our energy sector. But at the same time, we'll keep generating the jobs, and because without those jobs, as we started, jobs are so essential for young Australians, and whether that's in the renewable energy sector or anywhere else.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And I know you have to go in a minute, but I just had one final question. It hopefully will take a yes or a no. But in going forward, young people, as this conference has shown, really want a seat at the table to be able to contribute to these discussions, as we will be affected long into the future about decisions that are made today. Will you commit to genuinely engaging and consulting with young people on decisions moving forward that will affect our lives?
Always have, always will.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thanks for yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Eden and I am one of the youth representatives here to give a youth perspective on what the Prime Minister has just spoken about, as well as some of the key issues that we have been discussing throughout this summit.
Hi, my name is Varsha and I've done some work in the climate movement, and yeah, I'm just here to give a youth perspective and answer any questions.
Hi, my name's Ayushi. I'm here as well to give a youth perspective. I currently sit on the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority Board, so I have a bit of experience in the policy decision-making around education for students.
Thank you all for joining us. I might just open up to the floor. What's your initial reactions to what we've just heard from the Prime Minister? We might start with Varsha.
I feel like a lot of the times the message that people are actually needing to get through isn't getting through to politicians. It's very frustrating, especially with like things like the education cuts or climate change. Like we've definitely been pushing for much bigger or like different demands. So, you know, Australia is still not doing amazing at climate change. I think we were voted like second worst in the world on climate action. So it goes to show that our politicians really aren't listening to us. So to hear the Prime Minister saying that, you know, they've been doing so much, it's just very frustrating at times. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ashley, what was your initial reaction?
I really agreed with how the PM spoke about how we need to work together and how we need to engage both the older Australians, the young Australians, and everyone in between. But I do think that we need to have more young people represented in policy decisions that are going to affect us. Evidence shows that when youth are consulted on issues that affect them, that better policy and outcomes will be made. And that goes for everything, whether it's climate action or youth unemployment. So I think that young people need to have a seat at a table where it's an actual physical seat at a table where they can share their voice, share their thoughts, and their ideas are heard, respected, and then actioned.
Absolutely. And Ayushi, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, basically the same as Ashley. I think at the table is so important in decision making, and often our views are kind of neglected or not given the same importance as other people's views. And I think it just goes to show, and this entire conference goes to show how deeply we think about our future. And as the people who are going to be left with whatever world there is, it's so important that we're part of the decisions that create that world in the future and prepare young people to be leaders. So 100%, you know, whilst the government is doing things. I think having more youth on board in the decision making will transform the way we deal with these issues.
Absolutely. And I share how frustrating it can be as young people. We often don't get a lot of time with our leaders and our decision makers. And when we do, it can often feel like media spin or a few line catchphrases where we don't kind of see some real substantive policy or legislation that goes to better the situation for young people. What would all of you, and I'll get each of you to answer this, what would you like to see from your leaders in this space? It might not necessarily be a policy announcement, but how would you like to see them engage with young people?
I completely agree with having a seat at the table. I think just being able to listen to us when we're having those protests and we're having those actions is so important, because obviously these are like mass mobilizations that are happening. So clearly there's quite a lot of support for the demands that young people are making. And I think being the future of this country, it's so important that our politicians are able to take into account what we actually want and what we actually need.
Yeah, and just more in-depth consultancy. I feel like most of the conversations we have with them is them just telling us what they're doing and explaining it. But more than that, actually consulting with us and asking, yo, what's your opinion? I think that is so important on a larger scale. And conferences like this are so important for politicians to actually be watching and listening to hear the kinds of opinions going around. So more collaboration and consultancy, rather than sort of almost this condescending, like, oh yeah, we're doing it, you just don't know we're doing it kind of vibe. Yeah,
absolutely. Jahin, you've just joined us. How are you?
Very well.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, loud and clear.
What was your reaction to that conversation with the Prime Minister and his initial introduction?
Well, first of all, I think it was quite incredible to see the Prime Minister actually being in a youth-centered, event like this. So I was quite excited to see that. But then I think I share the same sentiment as everyone else. I think right now, after hearing what he said about, JobKeeper, employment transitions, all those factors, it's about translating those words into actions. So like you mentioned in the interview as well, having a youth strategy, having these things implemented and integrated for the next how many years. I think we need to provide young people with the, autonomy. We need to provide them with, reassurances. And at the moment, we don't have that. So I think having this dialogue, this productive dialogue between the Prime Minister and a young person like yourself, I think it does start something, great for the future. And I think right now it's just about seeing what, transpires after this conversation. And, if the topics we spoke about, is integrated and is successful and effective in the future.
Hiba, welcome. Do you feel that, based on what the Prime Minister said, that there are enough assurances for young people, or what would you like to see in that space?
Yeah, I mean, it was great for the Prime Minister to attend, but hearing, you asked some very strong questions, for him to give a better answer, more assurance. I remember you asked him a question about JobKeeper payments and what if it continues till March? And his first response is, well, look at what we've done. We've put billions of dollars in JobKeeper payments. Okay, but those JobKeeper or job seeker payments aren't going to be enough to sustain to Christmas or January, February, March. It's not enough for especially a person that usually works full time to get, eventually, I think they're bringing it down to $1,000 a fortnight or something, and that's before tax. So it's, the money factor is a major issue, as well as it goes back to the fact that despite all the training programs they're supplying, the free training courses, all the subsidized courses, it's not the problem that there's not enough education. Education in Australia is very prominent, but it's a problem of what happens after that, I remember there was a time where, I've done a bachelor and a diploma, and then I went to go apply for a job that clearly said graduate position. And then when they called me, they're like, oh, we're not offering the position because we need 5 years of experience. And I'm like, well, I just graduated, how much experience? And then it wasn't just work experience, like we need professional experience, you need to do this and this and this and this. So it's what happens after. It's not about getting there. Getting the education is somewhat the easy part for a lot of us, but it's kind of the plans of what needs to happen after, which they haven't given us much stability on.
Absolutely. And we saw before coronavirus hit that young people were struggling to get, they'd finished their degrees or their study, and they were struggling to find work that had anything to do with what they'd paid tens of thousands of dollars in HECS for. And that's just been exacerbated because of the crisis. And to me, it sounded like the Prime Minister wanted to rely on sort of market forces to see where jobs would come up in the future. Does that scare you, or how do you react to that sort of comment from the Prime Minister? Or did you interpret it differently?
Are you asking me, or is it just an
I'll open that to the floor.
Anyone else want to answer?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's assuring or reassuring at all to hear something like that. I think, like Ahiba mentioned, having a practical transition between finishing off your education and getting a job that suits those skills and qualifications that you earn is quite logical. So not having something like that and focusing on the market force, and then you've been hearing, uni fee rises and all those things. It's just not the things we want to hear as young people going forward, especially in this post-pandemic world, or we're currently in a pandemic. So it's just about creating those pathways, those avenues that young people can be like, hey, I have this set of skills. Can I apply for this job, or how can I better utilize this for a particular position I want to be in? Not have this degree and these qualifications and not have it useful at all. It's not a good thing to hear about. So I think more needs to be done, rather than just saying, we've been doing things. Like, we need to see evidence of young people feeling like they are useful. They're feeling like what they've been doing for the last 5, 6, 7 years is coming to fruition, and they're able to get the jobs that they deserve and they've got the merit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, did you have anything on that?
Yeah,
one?
I agree with what's been said. And I also think that there is a responsibility for current businesses and employers to actually contribute to some of the change that we need to see in this area. I think so often, all throughout my degree, I study law and psychology and Hindi, and I've just been told to do internships, to volunteer, to donate my time to try and gain this experience, because in the end, the piece of paper that I get is not going to be what gets me the job. That just sort of gets me into the door, it just opens the door. And so I think by having paid internships, by having employers supporting young people and wanting to train up graduates and undergraduates that are studying, we'll see the lasting changes both economically and socially. It needs to be a partnership across government, across the private sector as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What about climate change? How does everyone feel about the Prime Minister's response in that area? I know we didn't get a chance to go into it very much, but there was a question around climate and jobs.
I think it's amazing to hear the Prime Minister talk about it to a bunch of young people, first of all. But just in terms of creating jobs, like, there's so much potential in the renewable energy industry to not only create jobs, but also provide a much more sustainable future. And to see, I guess, the entire government kind of discounting that almost can be quite disheartening, especially when you've done work in the climate movement, or, you've seen friends and family like lose their homes due to things that could easily be taken action against. So, yeah.
Yeah. Ayushi, did you have any comments on the government's response to the climate and jobs question?
Yeah, I think, look, the general consensus of today was good, but not good enough. I suppose there just wasn't addressed as much, and considering how much climate affect our generation in the future, like it's literally in our hands to deal with the consequences of climate change. Unfortunately, I don't think that sort of message has been translated over for people to understand that really this is something we're concerned about because it's going to affect our generation and the following ones. But look, I do have to say that the fact that the Prime Minister joined this summit and took his time to join it is a massive step. It sounds like a small deal, but even if everything wasn't addressed, the fact that he is acknowledging that summits like this have importance for his presence politically just goes to show that we have advanced quite a lot in this youth sector and youth voice. So I think we should just take a moment to give ourselves a little pat on the back that we were able to do that. And, you know, whilst there's a lot of things we have to change, there has definitely been some good steps made in this regard.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's definitely a shift, absolutely, in having the Prime Minister engaging in these conversations. I think there's probably consensus here that we want young people's voices to be heard, you know, at the decision-making level, and we want to be able to contribute. You know, from what I can see, we're a very passionate and engaged generation, despite how often we have been ignored. What would you like to? How would you like to see young people sort of engaged and listened to by parliamentarians? Do we, you know, want some sort of committee of young people? Do we want a regular meeting with the Prime Minister? What do you see as sort of an effective way for the government to be listening to young people and hearing that diversity of voices in a really genuine and meaningful way?
I feel like, while it might be a long shot, but I think being able to have a youth representative at those parliament sittings or at those you know, what they would say, confidential things with the rest of the politicians, to be able to be in the room and actually give and be the voice of our people, of, you know, the new generation that is. Because while it's all well and good that they're saying that, you know, we're doing this and we're doing that and it's for the young people, how do we really know if we're not really sitting in the room and making sure that they are representing, you know, us as youth? At the end of the day, you know, it's a bunch of older politicians, you know, from the previous generation that are making decisions for the future generation. It just doesn't add up, you know, or it, like, another idea might be, you know, actually having, whether it's a Prime Minister or whether it's one of the ministers, living a day in the life of, you know, a young person in Victoria or Australia, whatever it may be, to actually see what they go through. You know, it's because I was hearing him say, you know, oh, like when I was in uni, we did this and that. So he's referring to things that happen in his prime time, but what happened then and what happened now is completely different. And you're never going to really know unless you're actually there in the forefront, seeing what's happening, not sitting really like behind a chair or just watching the news or things as they come in. Yeah, but can only be hopeful.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. Did Ayushi or Jahin have anything to add to that one? We did get a question in the chat, which we might reflect on, which is how about lowering the voting age? And I know that conversation about lowering the voting age to 16 has existed for some time now, but hasn't really seen much of a shift. What do we all think of that?
I think the voting age, to be honest, is one of many things that need to be done or considered for youth voice. Like, lowering the voting age is not the only thing that will sort of give us enough of a voice at the table. That's just my personal opinion. And if we do lower the voting age, it doesn't have to be only that. It has to be a lot of education around students and what voting is, how to vote properly, education around politics, because people who aren't involved in this sector have no idea. And then frankly, it's not worth, giving them a chance when they don't understand the value of that. So it needs to be, if that happens, which would be beneficial, but it has to be followed by actual support and mentorship for these young people to understand the impact of their voice. And I think that's what we should be focusing on, rather than just making policy changes where people are not understanding what is the value of my voice.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. Did you have any reflections on that, Jahin?
Yeah, look, I definitely back that idea about, lowering, voting age. But at the same time, when you do, look towards youth agency and youth participation with that, change in law, there has to be that sufficient amount of, things done in order to equip young people to be able to say, hey, this is my responsibility now. This is a role I have. These are the things available to me. Now is the time for me to act. Like Ayushi mentioned, education, integrating some sort of, seminars or time allocated during school time to be like, this is the, responsibility that you have. You can vote. This is how you do it. This is how the ballot papers go. I know you can relate with my own experiences at school. I don't think I did receive a lot of sessions or, basic education when it comes to voting and like the differentiating between different parties, what to look for, what affects me. So I think equipping them with those necessary skills and information needs to be as a supplementary when it comes to changing any type of law. So I think, like everybody mentioned, lowering the age alone won't be sufficient. It's just about having a collective effort towards that whole idea of youth participation and agency as a whole.
And yeah, can I just add as well, I think from someone who's been on a board as a youth representative, I'm kind of, against the idea of having just one person representing the entire youth voice, because it's so hard. Like, you don't know everyone's opinion. And I think what I would like to see more from the government is engaging with conferences like this, direct communication with masses of youth, getting their opinion, rather than sort of sometimes one opinion can become tokenistic, or one youth representative is kind of them just slotting in someone to seem good. I'd rather them actually engage and have conferences or summits where they directly ask masses of youth their opinion, so that each minority group can be heard. And I think that's more effective when making new policies in the future.
Absolutely. And we only have a few minutes left, but we might just go around to everyone. And if you had one thing that you would like to hear from the Prime Minister today, or one question that you would have liked answered, what would that be? And we might start with Ayushi, because I think you'll cycle through first.
I think just more direct and real opinions on how he's going to integrate youth voice in the future, not just actual implementation of youth voice. And if we start with youth voice, then we can have more youth in policy and decision making. So hearing what he's going to take in terms of implementations to ensure that he's hearing what youth have to say.
Jahin.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to see more solutions-oriented changes. So my main question would be, what does the youth strategy look like in the next, few years and in the long term? I think one thing we need for young people right now, whether it comes to university, lifestyle, work, is, some sort of reassurance, some sort of stability going forward. So just being able to see some sort of, evidence, concrete efforts from ministers, from the Prime Minister himself, into the youth strategy and how we move forward in this, ever-changing, tumultuous world. I think that would be, my main concern, and just, I think, something I can resonate with a lot of young people.
Absolutely, such an important point. Basha?
I think I'd just like to see the conversation shift away from just a political discussion, because it seems like every issue seems to be just framed in a political light, in an economic light. And I think that's really, really important to talk about economics, obviously, but then also sustainability and just, I guess, like mental health and climate change, all these things. Like, we are such an intersectional society. We can't just categorize all these issues into little boxes and say, okay, we'll fix the economy, then we'll just do this. Like, that's not how it works. So I think just bringing together, and I'd love to ask, like, what does a sustainable future look like? Because that's the most important thing. Like, these politicians have children, so I'm sure that they want their children to have a great life as well. So yeah, something like that.
Absolutely. And, you know, these completely agree, these sort of issues that we're talking about today and throughout the rest of the week, they don't exist in silos. They all interact with each other and impact us in different ways. So it is really critical that we, you know, can get that voice through. We're almost out of time. Did anyone have any final comments or reflections or any last things they wanted to get across before we wrap up the session?
I think, go for it. Well, I just wanted to say, like, I'm just so excited for sessions like this, where I just really want people to be empowered, if anything, from this session, to take away that, you know, there's so many people like you who are fighting for youth voice, and you just got to keep going, and eventually we will have a stance where we can change our future for the better.
Yeah, definitely. And like, thank you for organizing this kind of thing, because it's so important. And I feel like it's one of the only ways that we can really connect with politicians sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. I think having a platform like this that gives like a 19-year-old like myself, an ability to talk about what the Prime Minister said amongst a lot of other young people is just fantastic. So, you know, I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you all. And thank you all for having a chat with me about that session. I had a list of questions, but I sort of just got overwhelmed and taken aback by the conversation. And so I don't actually know if I asked the questions on my list, but hopefully I did it some justice for what we sort of want to get across there. But thank you all. And I hope we can continue having these conversations throughout the week, but also beyond the summer. You know, these issues don't just end on Friday. They're going to continue to be things that we need to have conversations about and find solutions. And like you've all said, keep fighting for, because unless we keep fighting, you know, there's no one else that's going to make these issues better for us. It's going to be us continuing to organise and putting forward that voice. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.